conference in London in '91, which was very well run by the Chartered Society, very, very well run, at the Barbican Centre, and we had some wonderful social things, social events. They had one at the Museum of Natural Sciences, to which the Queen and the Duke attended. And there were about, I think there must have been about 4,000 at the conference, 3,500 to 4,000. And the Queen and the Duke toured the whole of the museum, looked and saw hundreds and hundreds, and shook hands with hundreds of them. And I must admit, I spent most of my time with the Duke. David Teager, who was the conference chairman, who had been head of the School for the Blind in London, had met the Queen because she was a patron of their organisation as well, and so he looked after her. But then we met socially after, but the Duke, he was a bit of a character when he met with any of the attractive ladies, and I'm talking predominantly, there was a couple of very attractive ladies from Zimbabwe. He had a good long talk to them. And then there were some from the Scandinavian area, and I can't remember where, and he was quite captivated by their beauty, I'm sure. They were beautiful looking girls, women. And further down the line, he showed his ruthlessness when there was an American guy, and I knew him, I can't remember his name was Charles somebody, I can't remember what it is now. He started talking to the Duke and said he knew the Duke was interested in the gorillas of not Papua, it must have been up in Sabah or Borneo, and the Duke just looked at him and said, "You've been there?" And he said, "Yes, yes." And with that the Duke said, "It's people like you that they should keep out." So, and put him, he was trying to ingratiate himself, and the Duke put him right back on his heels. But that was just part of the social thing. We had a wonderful dinner for everyone at the Guildhall, and the speaker had been the speaker. He and I had a few words to say each, and he was a chap called Lord Tony Pandy, who had been the Speaker of the House of Commons. George Thomas had been his Welsh name, and what a wonderful man he was. And subsequent to that, I saw him 2 or 3 times when he came to Australia. He had a sister who lived down Wollongong way, and he would send me a Christmas card, because I'd kept in touch with him from time to time, and he was also a very good friend of Paul Keating, ex-Prime Minister. And Paul and I, one of my practices and Paul Keating's office were next door. And you can ask Peter Lama about that, because he can remember Paul Keating in the office next door very well. And so, of course, on occasions he'd come to lunch, and Keating and I and Lord Tony Pandy would have lunch. That was just grew from that area. But we had a luncheon at the House of Lords, no, a dinner, set up by the Chartered Society, and Virginia Bottomley was there, who was the current Minister of Health, and her offsider, or second secretary, Diana Hobson, Lady Diana Hobson, who was a very charming, good-looking young lady, and the AMA, sorry, the AMA, the British BMA, some of their board were there. David Blunkett, who was the Home Secretary and the government to follow, and it was really a high-powered thing, and and I know the guy from the AMA had a few words to say, and anyhow, in those days, the Chartered Society was known as a profession supplementary to medicine. And I thought this was rather derogatory in its attitude, and so I spoke a bit about that. And I said, I don't see physiotherapy being supplementary to medicine. And I said, I think it serves plays a much greater part. And of course, the AMA guy was looking daggers, and Virginia Bottomley was looking with quite intently. And I said, realistically, I can actually see the society being called complementary to medicine. And whether they spell it with an E or an I is for the BMA to determine. And anyhow, that when it concluded, both David Blunkett and Virginia, who was a lovely woman, Virginia, she came over and said, "You laid it on the line to those guys, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Hope you can support me in this crusade." She said, "I think we can do quite admirably about this." She was a wonderful soul. I liked her enormously, and I met her 2 or 3 times, and she's very open, and yeah, I thought she was one of the nicest health ministers I met anywhere in the world, and very able, and yeah, not sympathetic, but cooperative to physiotherapy, and that's what we're looking for. You need the cooperation at the political level to make a stand. And currently, I see, in Australia, we're a bit fortunate in so much as that Jenny McConnell, whom I'm sure many of you have heard of, with her work she's done with knees and now with shoulders, the leader of the opposition, Tony Abbott, has been a patient of hers for some years. So she's got his ear all the time, and has his. And I know I was talking to her a couple of years back when I was in Sydney, and she had access to, when he was the Minister for Health at one stage, and she had his private number and everything. So if you have access like that, it means the stature of the profession's grown enormously, and it really has. And how would I say it? Not the management, but the marketing of the profession is a subdued exercise. I see now when they talk about injury and rehabilitation, they will talk about physiotherapy. Before we used to be confronted with chiropractic a lot. I don't see that as being a problem realistically. And certainly, even though they now have colleges of chiropractic or university degrees, there's a lot of confusion now because some of them have come out and said they're still teaching the management of organic disease, and you might have seen recently in the paper where the Australian Medical Association and indeed some of the senior people from the universities have come out and said, especially the medical universities, this is not to be, I think it's whether must be losing ground and trying another tack, it seemed to me to be like. But physiotherapy is, in those years that I was involved, those 40 years, has changed from, as everybody might have, or somebody may have mentioned earlier, it was a bit like a handmaiden service post-war, and that's when the growth really started, when the management of those post-war injuries and of course then with the advent of the car injury, I think the management of those enhanced tremendously the stature of the profession. But I still see a lot of the young people, who are involved in the profession, they get a lot of pleasure out of it. Job satisfaction is a big thing. I know, interestingly enough, of some who completed the program and then have gone off and done something else. And it's usually to do with dealing with somebody who's not well. And they find that depresses them. They find that they don't have the mental capacity to get on top of their problem. And this is part of the emphasis they have on behavioural sciences, don't they, today, is to try and get the undergraduates to understand a little bit more what these people are really suffering. And I know of a couple early on in the piece in New South Wales whom I had met as students who did some clinical work with us and subsequently said they couldn't handle the illness and injury. They said it just depressed them. But you just have to look at the exposure in the newspapers and the TV today. The number, every time you see the sportsman, he said, "Oh, we'll be receiving physio for the next couple of weeks, then we'll review him, see if he's going to play again, or he'll be playing, we hope, in a couple of weeks." There wouldn't be a day go by without the sports paper reporting on the profession, which is great because it's before the public's eyes. And I think that's the growth. And I see a big future, but the difficulty, and I don't know whether this will be a problem in latter time, but I know that, you know, with the growth in the age population, whether people are still prepared to spend more time in gerontology. But I can remember when I was asked by the head of the university in Adelaide, or it must have been back in the 70s, and I was having lunch with her, and she was in charge of the university, and she just said to me, "Where do you see the initial growth right now?" Well, I said, "It's patently going to occur in gerontology, management of the aged, and also in workplace reform and occupational health, because the automation and often the load that people are expected to do is going to, in the workplace, is going to have major ramifications, and of course more injuries." And I still believe that to be the case. I still think that the gerontology area is, well, exponential growth is there. I think the management of workplace injury is much better. But I suppose what really did grow was sporting injury and people's participation in sports, be it of a casual nature on the weekend or of a professional nature on a financial basis. And I did have occasion to work with a professional rugby league team for some years. But that was prior to the guys being full-time footballers. Most of them had a job, and I was fortunate enough to work with quite a number of people from that team who were playing in the Australian rugby league team. And the incentive then was that they wanted the money, so they kept playing. So you had a little bit of a problem in managing injuries because they wanted to play next week to pick up their extra pay. As a simple variation from when I practiced in Masterton, I looked after rugby teams, and there was no money involved, and the guys were much more acceptable to the instructions you give. They accepted those more readily. We had said, "Look, you could be out for 3 or 4 weeks." They said, "Okay." But rugby league, a lot of those players play before they're ready, and I see that happen on a regular basis. So that really encompasses the time that I've had in the profession. I really don't have much to do with it today, apart from reading the journals and the correspondence from the world body. But I know that the growth has been exponential. And I think back to the days when Dunedin was the sole school, and they graduated. We started with 66 students, and we graduated 42. So virtually a third was lost on the way. Some did repeat the following year, and some just dropped out entirely. So there was quite a culling process, you might say, that existed. I don't know today what the expectations are, but or what the position is for people in the workforce. I don't know. I know in Australia there's still plenty of jobs. The health authorities have still grown the positions, as opposed to what I've seen in past times with some of the countries when things got a bit tough. They cut some of the places back a bit. They do have a problem occurring over in Australia with the number of medical graduates. They're going to exceed places available, where they cannot get clinical placement. I hope that doesn't occur in the physiotherapy sphere, because I think the clinical placement part is really vital to the standards that the public expect. It's really the public expectation that drive us. It certainly drove me to the postgraduate studies, even though I didn't do any tertiary postgraduate studies, which were not very available in those, back 40 years ago or even 35 years ago. Most of it was part-time post-grad stuff or on-the-job learning programs. You learn pretty quick too often. So that's how I see it anyhow. I think the profession as a whole is very strong, worldwide, and no doubt there'll be hiccups on the way in certain areas, and it often depends on money from government, which we have no control over.